The first Sabbath or the first day of the week? The first step of analysis. Did Luther translate the Greek phrase μίαν σαββάτων as the first day Sabbath? In this video I will analyze the Myles Ketelsen's claim that Martin Luther translated the Greek phrase μίαν σαββάτων, literally first of Sabbath, in Matthew 28:1 as the first day Sabbath. We will see that this claim is not true. First, let's listen again to how Myles frames his claim.
In fact, you guys love Martin Luther. I've heard you cite him on his views regarding the state of the dead, which he shifted on later in his life, by the way, due to the biblical text. Well, let's look at his translation of this verse, and then the mechanics around why he arrived at the conclusion that he did. Luther was utilizing the Textus Receptus manuscript line, which is what the King James was translated from, that the SDAs love. How does he translate it? As first day Sabbath. Quote, Luther's translation. Now in the evening of the Sabbath, which began in the morning of the first solemnity of Sabbaths, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre.
Here Myles claims that Luther translated the Greek phrase μίαν σαββάτων in Matthew 28:1 as the first day Sabbath, and he gives the English rendering of the Luther's German translation. Let's compare this English rendering with Myles' claim that Luther translated the Greek phrase as first day Sabbath, while he was saying,
how does he translate it? As first day Sabbath.
There was this slide on the screen. If we put side by side the English rendering of the Luther's German translation given by Myles and what he actually claimed about Luther's translation, we will see that Myles contradicts himself. He said that the Greek phrase μίαν σαββάτων is translated by Luther as first day Sabbath, but on the screen we read the first solemnity of the Sabbath. Strictly speaking, these phrases are not the same. Verbatim, they are different. In the first phrase, the combination of the words first day serves as an adjective to the noun Sabbath. But in the second phrase, the combination of words the first solemnity does not work the same way. It joins to the remaining part of the second phrase by the preposition of, which in this case denotes possessional relation. In other words, the Sabbaths possess, own the first solemnity. The first solemnity belongs to the Sabbath, so grammatically the first and the second phrases are different. Do they have the same meaning? As I understand the first phrase, first day Sabbath, it means the Sabbath that occurs on the first day. But the second phrase is a little bit hard to understand. That's why let's analyze it more deeply. According to the Webster Dictionary, 1852, the word solemnity primarily means religious ceremony. Secondarily, it means gravity, steady seriousness, or, as the modern Oxford Dictionary, the 11th edition explains, the state or quality of being solemn. In the latter, this meaning is given as a primary one. I think that the Webster's primary meaning is better suited to the context, because Matthew doesn't discuss whether the day is solemn or not, but he writes of a particular day. So the phrase the first solemnity of the Sabbath can be understood in two ways. First, if the word Sabbath signifies many Sabbaths, then the phrase must mean the first ceremony, the first celebration among the Sabbaths. or in other words, the ceremony which is celebrated first in the order of the successive Sabbaths, 7th days, and it is irrelevant whether this ceremony occurs on the first or any other succeeding Sabbath. It can occur on the second Sabbath in the succession of the Sabbath, but it is the first in the succession of the ceremonies. Second, if the word Sabbath signifies a singular Sabbath, then the phrase must mean the first ceremony on the Sabbath, which implies that several ceremonies can occur during the same Sabbath. Both these meanings differ from the meaning of the phrase first day Sabbath, so the English rendering of the Luther's German translation of the Greek phrase mίαν σαββάτων contradicts Myles' claim both verbatim and in the meaning. So he destroys his own claim by that English rendering which he himself gives. Luther did not translate the Greek phrase mίαν σαββάτων as first day Sabbath, so it seems that I have refuted Myles' claim. Yes, if we will rely only on that analysis, which I have already done. But let's be fair with Myles and do more extensive analysis. The English word solemnity etymologically comes from the Old French word solemnité, which is derived from medieval Latin word solemnitas. If we will look up this word in the Universal Latin Lexicon of Paciolati and Fosselinus, we will read the following: solemnitas, a solemnity, solemnis dies, solemne. According to this dictionary, the word solemnitas can mean solemn day, solemnis dies. It is the day itself on which a celebration occurs. So the phrase the first solemnity of the Sabbath can mean the first solemn day of the Sabbath, but I think it still cannot be understood as meaning the first day Sabbath. Why? Because even if we will take into consideration the fact that in the Septuagint and in the New Testament the plural Sabbath can signify a singular Sabbath, this word is connected to the first part of the phrase by the preposition of, which denotes possessional relation. The English preposition of is an equivalent of the Greek possessive genitive case. Earlier, I've already explained the meaning of this possessional relation. The phrase "the first solemn day," contrary to what Myles and Dr. Kaiser claim, does not modify the word Sabbath, does not function as an adjective for it. I will touch this point more deeply and broadly in one of my following videos. I will not crowd it into this video. The first solemn day either belongs to a single Sabbath day or to a group of several successive Sabbath days. Could there be several solemn days on the same Sabbath day? Yes, in the Old Testament times, the weekly solemn day, the seventh day Sabbath, could coincide with ceremonial Sabbath, for example, with the Day of Atonement. But can we say that one of them was the first in time? No, they were happening simultaneously. So the phrase "the first solemn day of the singular Sabbath" from the point of the order in time does not make sense. That's why the only remaining meaning is the first solemn day of the several Sabbaths. If we will continue to apply the meaning "the seventh day of the week" to the word Sabbath, this phrase can only mean the solemn day which occurs first in time on one of the successive 7th days. So in no way the phrase "the first solemn day of the Sabbath" can mean the first day Sabbath. But let's try to apply the meaning rest or day of rest to the word Sabbath, as Myles and Dr. Kaiser do. Would it prove their position? The phrase "the first solemn day of rest" would imply that there are several solemn days of rest which do not necessarily follow each other without interruption. So, between the first solemn day of rest and the second one can be a period of at least 1 day, and the first solemn day of the rest does not necessarily occur on the first day of the week. It can occur on any day of the week. But we should remember that when Myles uses the phrase "the first day Sabbath," he precisely means the first day of the week or Sunday. That's why, strictly speaking, the phrase "the first solemn day of rest" differs in meaning from the phrase "the first day Sabbath." So, this additional analysis still shows that Myles is wrong in claiming that Luther translated the Greek phrase "mίαν σαββάτων" as the first day Sabbath. Up to this moment, we were analyzing the English rendering of the Luther's German translation provided by Myles. Let's now check whether he gave correct rendering. The Luther's German New Testament 1545 is available in the internet on different sites, but I didn't find the original 1545 edition. According to those sites, the original German text of Matthew 28:1 is:
Am Abend aber des Sabbats, welcher anbricht am Morgen des ersten Feiertages der Sabbate, kam Maria Magdalene und die andere Maria, das Grab zu besehen.
And here on the screen the Google translation of this text. Now, on the evening of the Sabbath, which began on the morning of the first day of the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. In essence, this translation is the same as that which was given by Myles. Let's see the meaning of the German word Feiertag. Let's look up in the Murat Sanders Encyclopedic English-German and German-English Dictionary. The word Feiertag can be found in the article fair. Here it is: day of rest, play day, or holiday, high day, feast day. I think that Myles translated this word as solemnity because the same dictionary explains the German word Feier as solemnity. So, literally, the word Feiertag means solemnity day. The presence of the preposition "of" in the English rendering of the Luther's German translation corresponds to the grammar of the German phrase "der Sabbate," which is in plural genitive. Der Sabbate, in its return, corresponds to the Greek word sabbaton, which also is in plural genitive. So Luther simply gave literal rendering of the Greek word. Did he know that the Greek word sabbaton, as well as the Hebrew word Shabbat, can mean week? Although Dr. Kaiser, in his book about Sunday, virtually denies that this word has that meaning, in one of my following videos I will give ample proof that it has. Even if Luther did knew that the Greek word sabbaton had the meaning week, it seems that he did not take it into consideration while he was translating Matthew 28:1. Instead, he gave translation "the first holiday of the Sabbath." Why he did so? In his sermon for Easter Sunday, based on Mark 16:1-8, he wrote, "In the first place, we shall briefly examine the text of this narrative, and afterwards speak of the benefits of the resurrection of Christ and how we should build upon it." The text reads, Verse 1. And when the Sabbath was past. Here we must remember Mark writes of the Sabbath according to the custom of the Hebrews. For according to the Jewish reckoning, the day began in the evening and lasted until the evening of the next day. As the first chapter of Genesis says, and there was evening and there was morning, one day, a second day, a third day, and so forth. Thus, the first and greatest Sabbath began on the evening of the day when Christ was crucified. That is to say, at the time of sunset on the evening of Friday. Our reckoning conveys the wrong sense. Yesterday was the great Sabbath, when Christ lay in the grave. In addition to this, the Jews had 7 full days which they celebrated and all of which they called Sabbath, counting them from the first holiday after the great Sabbath and calling it Prima Sabbatorum, first of the Sabbaths, and the third holiday Secunda Sabbatorum, second of the Sabbaths, and so forth. On these days they ate only wafers and unleavened bread, for which reason they are also called by the evangelists the days of unleavened bread. From this we must conclude that Christ rose before sunrise and before the angel descended in the earthquake. Afterwards the angel only came to open the empty grave, etc., as has been clearly described by the evangelists. It should be noticed that in Mark 16:2 there is a Greek phrase which in its grammatical construction is similar to that which is in Matthew 28:1. So I think this Luther's explanation can be applied to the latter. He explains here that the Jews called every day of the feast of unleavened bread Sabbath. They had 7 Sabbaths, and Luther also claims that they called each of these successive Sabbaths by using certain formula. The first Sabbath was called the first of the Sabbaths, the second Sabbath was called the second of the Sabbaths, and so on until the 7th Sabbath. I think he made mistake when he wrote that the third holiday is the second of the Sabbaths. That's why I have corrected him. So in the Luther's mind, the Greek phrase mia sabbaton meant the first holiday among the 7 ceremonial Sabbaths of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It is clear from the fact that he used the equivalent Latin phrase prima sabbatorum, the first of the Sabbaths, and he used in this his sermon the same German word Feiertag, which he used in his translation of the New Testament. He didn't substantiate his claim about the Jews. According to the God's command, only the first and the 7th day were considered ceremonial Sabbaths. See Leviticus 23:6-8. And also the Sabbath on which Jesus lied in the tomb was the first day of the feast. The first day of that week, the Sunday, was not the first day of the feast. So I don't know why Luther gave such strange explanation. Anyway, he didn't understand the Greek phrase mia sabbaton as signifying the Sabbath on the first day of the week. He meant the first day, the first holiday of the feast. He was not speaking about the weekly Sunday. So, we can make final conclusion that Luther, by his phrase the first holiday of the Sabbaths, didn't mean the Sabbath which occurs on the first day of the week, or Sunday. He meant the first Sabbath or the feast of unleavened bread. That's why Myles' claim that Luther translated mίαν σαββάτων as first day Sabbath is not true. In the next video, I will discuss what is the correct literal rendering of the Greek phrase μίαν σαββάτων in Matthew 28:1.